A boundary is I make a request to you about something that I need or I want or I won't tolerate. And you decide for yourself if you're going to accept the boundary or not. And if you choose not to, then I had to decide for myself what I'm going to do about that for me. Hey, so today I am talking about boundaries. Yes, that's a big one, isn't it? I know it's actually one of my favorite topics. So I'm really excited to talk about this because often we have entirely bad misconceptions about what real boundaries are. So if you're ready to learn about what a real boundary is, then let's go.
I'm Dr. Charlie Hornis, highly anxious people pleaser turned master certified professional life coach. Learning to manage my brain was so life-changing for me that I got certified so that I could teach these incredible evidence-based practices to you. Are you ready for massive change? Let's go.
Hey, so, often we expect folks, once they're learning about managing their mind and thought work, to start doing some of this work, learning about thoughts and feelings, the model, the 5 steps of the model, learning about your manual and your expectations of other people. So if you haven't heard those episodes yet, go back and check those out because that would be really helpful to get you ready for this one. So basically, boundaries are often used to instigate control over other people. And that's not what they're for. But often that's what happens when people think that they are exerting healthy boundaries. They're expecting other people to behave in a certain way. And often it involves some kind of threat. And boundaries are not about threats. That looks like if you do this, then I threaten to do this, like retaliatory or, some kind of extreme consequence to teach a lesson, blah, blah, blah. That's not what we're talking about here. A boundary is I make a request to you about something that I need or I want or I won't tolerate. And you decide for yourself if you're going to accept the boundary or not. And if you choose not to, then I had to decide for myself what I'm going to do about that for me. So here's an example. This is an example my coach, Brooke, uses a lot. And it's kind of, we use it a lot because it makes a lot of sense, even if it seems a little dated. So just stick with me here. But for example, if you smoke in your car and I have to go somewhere with you in your car and I don't want you to smoke, then my boundary is going to be, sure, I'll go with you, but you can't smoke in the car when I'm in it. And then I have to think about what am I going to do for me if you decide not to adhere to my boundary. So maybe I decide if you smoke in the car, I'm going to get out. You can smoke in the car all day long. I'm just not going to be there. Maybe we don't carpool anymore. And that's just the way it's got to be. When it comes to boundaries, you get to decide what is and is not acceptable for you. And then what you're going to do to protect yourself from a boundary transgression. So if you don't like secondhand smoke, you need to excuse yourself from the situation where you're no longer in harm's way or in the way of something you find inappropriate, right? So it's not about making threats. It's not about getting people to change their behavior. It's about you deciding what works for you and what you're going to do if the boundary is transgressed for you, so that you feel safe, so that you feel taken care of, so that you are not in a situation you are uncomfortable with. So you make the request, and the person is going to decide for themselves, will they honor the request or will they not honor the request? For example, will the person smoke in the car while you're in it, or will they choose not to so that you will stay in the car? If they transgress the boundary, then your response would be, I will get out of this car. I will leave. This is what I will do for me if this boundary is not complied with. If it's your prerogative to smoke in the car, it's your car. It's your lungs. It's your life. But I'm not going to be in it. And that's my decision about a boundary transgression. I'm not trying to make you stop smoking, nor am I trying to make you stop smoking in your own car, right? That would be ludicrous. Now, it's probably helpful to that person, but no one's going to stop doing some kind of behavior like that because you get out of the car. Like that's not going to change that behavior. And again, how many times do we talk about the silver bullet of understanding that we have zero control over what other people do? So if your boundaries are an expectation of changing other people's behavior, you are going to be sorely disappointed because it's not happening. People don't do what we want. All you need is for the other person to transgress or cross the boundary that you have laid out. And if they do so, you have to have a decision already made prior to, if it's something that you know you need a boundary around. And typically when that happens, we already know what it is, right? For example, you have a friend that stops by your house unannounced all the time. And it really is inconvenient for you and you don't appreciate it. And for you, it's just not appropriate and it's a non-negotiable. So what do you decide to do if this person does this again? Well, maybe you tell them, it's not okay to come by my house unannounced. The next time you do it, I'm not going to answer the door. Or whatever works for you. But that way, you are not disturbed. Often, people are not going to be pleased. They're going to get mad sometimes, especially if it's someone close to you who expects to just kind of, do what they want. The thing is, you have got to stick to your guns when it comes to what you choose to do for yourself when that boundary is transgressed. This person thinks what they're doing is okay. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. So why would they change their behavior? They don't see anything wrong with it because they're already doing it. I love how we think we're going to change people's behavior as if they see what they're doing is wrong too, and they're just doing it anyway. They don't see that. Most people aren't out there trying to intentionally be jerks all the time. They're not. Just like you're not, I hope. Just like I try not to be, But if it's not okay with you, you also get to decide what is and is not okay with you. And it's not that you're trying to be terrible to somebody else. It's just driving you crazy, like bonkers, right? And so something has to give. Well, you have to decide for yourself what that is. You have to decide whatever the thing is that you're going to follow through with. And then you actually have to follow through with it. That's the key. Do what you say you're going to do. If you're not willing to do it, don't say it. You have to do things, again, that your brain believes it's believable and it's true. So, you can't say, I'm going to dive out of the car at 50 miles an hour, just to show you. Like, number one, your brain's not going to buy that. And you're going to feel terrible about yourself because you don't actually do it when the boundary is transgressed, which typically it's got to be transgression. If you're setting boundaries, you've already experienced this before. So the expectation that you will be changing the behavior of other people with your boundaries is wrong. But in my management coaching, you get to decide for yourself what is and is not appropriate for you, what you will and you will not tolerate. And then you get to say to somebody else, you do you. But if you do this thing that obviously we've already talked about, because now I'm setting a boundary, right? If you do this thing again, this is what I'm going to do to take care of me. And then it's up to that person. If they see you modeling from a place of love and not trying to change them, but they realize they will lose your company if they do this. They will not be able to see you in your home because they haven't called first or scheduled with you in advance. But you're not making threats. You're just modeling that you're going to care for yourself when it comes to things that you feel are non-negotiable, like smoking in a car or stopping by without calling or scheduling or texting me after 10 o'clock. But I have a kid out and I have to keep my phone on or, whatever. Something's happening and I can't turn off my phone, but you're, texting and texting and texting. Whatever the things are that you find inappropriate in your life, you get to decide what you will do about it, not what they should do about it. It's not about them. It's about you. And when you model this for others and when you follow through with whatever the consequence is, then maybe that will change somebody's perspective so that they can consider doing things differently in order to have your time if it's an important relationship for both of you. And if they don't, that may say something to you because although your opinions are not right or wrong, you still get to decide what is and is not negotiable for you, what you discern as appropriate and inappropriate for you. And you have that right to like and dislike what you want to like and dislike. The only thing is you cannot force that upon other people. It's not going to work anyway. As many of you know, I am approved now because we have so much excitement on the channel on YouTube as an Amazon content influencer, whatever that is. I don't know. My kids think it's really cool. I don't know what it is, but I've got a place now where I can put everybody's resources in one storefront. The link is in the show notes and I have it identified by episode, Amazon exciting influencer storefront thing. I'm such an old lady. Like, how is this happening? But my kids say it's a cool thing. So whatever. I'll put all of the stuff there that is relevant to the show. And, lots of people ask me about all kinds of recommendations and whatever. And all of you long-term listeners, from my one season, and all of you that know me in real life, you know that I'm obsessed with high fantasy and paranormal romance. And I do the new adult and adult books, not the YA young adult stuff. And it's always hard to find really good books for your TBR is what we call it, to be read. And so I've always got these great folks giving me incredible books. There's a whole billion of us. We're like the true crime people, except we're, into fairy love or whatever. It's a whole thing. So you can also find my TBR list there and also make recommendations to me. So I've got everything curated. I'm constantly updating it. Anything from I'm videoing all the time. And so I go through insane amounts of makeup and skincare products that keep me from, looking like I'm 8,000 years old at my ripe young age of, I'm not going to tell you. And all of these incredible metaphysical and theological books that I've studied and that many of my guests and I refer to, the psychological research material. And I may just put on my favorite shoes there too. I've got one pair I wear every day. If you want to know what they are, go check it out. When you use
the what we call affiliate links. And I'm now becoming an affiliate for a whole bunch of different things. It's all on my website at charliehornesscoaching.com. And it's on the bonus resources page. What happens is when you purchase something off of that, a portion of it goes back to the show. And so what you're doing basically when you buy from there is you're supporting the show at no additional cost to you, which is kind of like the coolest thing ever. So you're going to buy something, you might as well buy it anyway, but then you support the show at no additional cost. I have those links. Check out what else is on there. And as you browse and if you decide to grab something, you're supporting the show. Again, at no additional cost to you. Again, I don't know what this thing is, but it's supposed to be cool and it's going to help the show and it's going to help us continue to create content for you and bring on incredible guests that are, they blow my mind. So I'm hoping they will blow your mind too. And then there'll just be some fun stuff. And don't forget my TBR list there, whether it's metaphysics and psychology and theology or high fantasy romance. You're going to find your next favorite read right there. Let's go.
Wasting your time trying to change other people's behavior is not going to work. And that's not a boundary. And threatening is not a boundary. You do need to, of course, hold people accountable if they've done something inappropriate. Like, you have a child screaming or a teenager being disrespectful to you. Well, that's not okay. Obviously, not okay. But you don't have to get in a yelling match with them. And you don't have to allow the thoughts you're having about it that generate feelings of frustration or anger or any of these things to manifest out of you. Because then you're now in a screaming match, right? It's like you're trying to model adult behavior for a child or a teenager. Meanwhile, you're now one-upping each other with the screaming. Don't talk to me like that. I'll talk to you however I want. This is just a teenager being a teenager. These are kids being kids, right? They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So the sort of key to that, you always hold people accountable for sure, but you get to do it from a place of love. You get to do it from unconditional love. And you get to decide when somebody is pushing your buttons, when you need to set that boundary, when they're transgressing it, when they're being disrespectful, all of those things. You get to decide, are you going to come from a place of anger and frustration? Or are you going to come from a place of love? Because obviously you're in the relationship for a reason, right? And when we're talking about boundaries, like I just said, it's happened before. That's why we're talking about the boundary. It's not the first time this has happened. Otherwise, you don't need a boundary. Boundaries are for things that continue to happen over and over again that are upsetting to you or frustrating or annoying or, all the things that get in the way of relationships. We still hold people accountable, but we don't have to come from that place of frustration or anger. We can think about love. How do we come from a place of love for this person who's clearly in my life, that I've clearly chosen to continue to keep in my life because we were having this issue multiple times, that we need to talk boundaries now. You're clearly in it for, to maintain a relationship. So you get to decide also how you walk into that conversation. You don't have to participate in every argument you're invited to. See, that's a big thing. You don't. Just like your thoughts are made up, so is this idea that what you're thinking about other people's behavior is correct, because that's made up too. So you can decide, are you going to come at this with anger and frustration and allow the fight, flight, freeze to take over when you already know that's your survival brain trying to save you when it thinks you're being attacked. Now, your teenage daughter is not a bear. I swear every episode I have to bring up bears. I don't do it on purpose. I know it's annoying. You can set your boundary with me. And one of the things you get to do is remember that you love them. One of my favorite things is, I don't know if you're a parent looking for a cool parenting class. We did Love and Logic, and I don't agree with everything, but there's a lot of really, really good stuff in there. And, you know, one of the things that we would say when they were little was, I love you too much to argue. And it's now become a joke because when they started, now that they're older and they, you know, are conscious little beings with their own opinions, and will say that, well, I love you too much to argue. And they know exactly what that means. They know I said what I said, and I've said what I said. Yeah, I said what I said. The end, right? There's nothing else to say. You asked, I answered. The end. And they groan and they wander down the hall banging their heads and just, oh, don't say that. But they know what it means because we set the boundary when they were young. But we don't do it angrily, right? That's the cool thing I love about that course is it teaches you that you can respond with love. And you do not have to let other people be responsible for your feelings, which is back to mind management and thought work. Other people are not responsible for your feelings. They're responsible for their feelings. So when things start getting a little heated, you know, in the home with the teenage daughter, whatever, the first thing you should be thinking is, I love this person. Look at him go. And I was like, whoa, there's the teenager I've been waiting for to come out. Mine's a tween. It's like the sarcasm is out and about for real. He woke up one day and totally understood sarcasm. And it can be frustrating. But I also think it's funny because he's got this great sense of humor and it often comes out at the wrong times. But he's learning. He knows if it's not appropriate, mom doesn't laugh. It's not funny. Once the boundary is transgressed, there are loving consequences. And part of it is I walk away. You know, it's like, I'm not going to give you the attention you want with your sarcasm because now it's not a good time. Or that was a little over the top, little inappropriate, right? You can be sarcastic to a point. And then we start going into disrespect. And we're going to learn the difference between those. And I will follow up with what I think is appropriate for me. And part of it is I'm not going to stay and listen to it. I would just walk away. And they know that. If I don't like something and they continue, I walk away. And then they don't get the response that they're trying to get, the reaction. They're not pulling my strings and saying, hey, look at the lady get all red in the face because of what I do. I say something stupid and she gets really mad. Watch. And they're pulling my strings. They're pushing my buttons. And that happens every day out there. People see, they get a reaction out of you and they start doing it over and over because they feel they get like a little power trip that they have control over you. And it's you who gives them that control, not them. They don't take it from you. You hand it over voluntarily. Instead, you create your own boundary, which means when you do this, I will do this. And it's not in a form of a threat. I love my coach. She can be really inappropriate. And it's awesome. So she says this, if you don't take out the trash, honey, I'm not having sex with you. No, that's not a boundary. That's a full-on manipulative threat. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what is and is not acceptable for you, and what you will choose to intentionally do when a boundary is transgressed. What are the things that are driving you up a wall about people that you need to set boundaries with? What are those things? What are the circumstances? What are the thoughts you're having? And what feelings is this causing you? Remember, your thoughts are being made up by your brain. Your brain is generating words. Someone may be doing something over and over again, and you are interpreting it as disrespect. They don't love you, this, that, and the other. If it's something that needs to have some accountability, then yeah, there needs to be some kind of consequence. But that's not a threat. That's not a withholding of something that a person needs, like love. You're not going to say, if you don't take out the trash, I'm not feeding you dinner, child. Like, that's disproportionate. That's not what we're talking about. You have to have the things that you are willing and unwilling to do when somebody pushes past the boundary that you've now set. And then you follow through with it, whatever it is. And you can have consequences for people and still come from a place of love. I love my sons so much that I'm willing to give them consequences so that they grow up to be decent people. And I'd rather they learn the consequences now of making bad choices or being disrespectful or not listening to instruction, while the consequences are low, rather than them learning in their teenage years and make really stupid, bad decisions that could have horrible consequences. So I'm willing to do that. That's my decision as a parent, that I will do X, Y, and Z when you do X, Y, and Z. However, it's not a threat. And I do it from a place of love as often as I can remember in the moment, which is not easy. Again, everything we talk about here is discipline. It's practice. It's just like the first time you go to the gym after a long time. You're in a lot of pain. It's painful. And you don't want to go back because it was that painful, But the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then you start to see results. So back to that brain stuff, building that new neural pathway of setting the boundaries in ways that you find appropriate. You discern what is and is not acceptable to you, what it is and is not negotiable to you. And then you decide for yourself what you're going to do in response to them now transgressing the boundary again. And then you have to follow through. So those are sort of your steps for this. You know how I love how to and step-by-step stuff. You need to identify the person and what the boundary transgression is to begin with. You have to be very clear about it. And then without the manual stuff, like I've talked about, where we have these expectations of other people, our brain is made up in what we call the manual, but rarely do we tell anybody about it, right? They don't know our expectations. So you have got to be very clear about your boundary. If you continue to do this, I will begin to do this. And it's not in a form of a threat. So you need to be very clear with the other person, and not clear in the way that you said it. You have to be clear in the way that they heard you and they get you and they understand you and they understand the consequence that you will uphold if it happens again, whatever the it is. So that's what a real boundary is. No harm or threat to another person, not taking away, life-sustaining things, especially love and food. Take away the phone. Yeah, they could live without a phone, And also remember, you can choose to do all of this in a way that comes through the lens of love. Remember why you're in relationship in the first place. Don't get into a one-upping yelling match with somebody, especially if it's someone you're trying to model good behavior for, like a child or, your niece. You're trying to show her or him how to behave, and you do it by yelling louder than they do. That's not going to help. That's you reverting to being a teenager and being an emotional child when you need to step into emotional adulthood. And emotional adulthood just simply means that you are responsible for your feelings. Now, that doesn't mean you should walk around being insensitive and callous and saying and doing whatever you want. You can. Just know that other people will set boundaries and you will have consequences and you have to live with those, right? So yeah, I guess you could do that, walk around and do whatever you want, but you will have to face the wrath of other people's boundaries. Even if they do it with love, you're still going to have consequences. So try not to do that. However, you're not responsible for how other people feel. That's their brains. Those are their thoughts that generate their feelings. And if their thoughts aren't real, they can change them incrementally with a new thought that is true and believable. Even if it's a small thought, a small change, that's their work. So you have to stay on your side of the street and understand, as an emotionally adult person, nobody's responsible for your feelings but you. And you don't get to be resentful if you're not clear on your boundaries and then follow through with the decision you make for yourself that you will do in order to remove yourself from the situation or the transgression. You get to change your thoughts because thoughts aren't real. You get to change your reactions to responses at any time. You get to move from a place of frustration and even anger to a place of love, because this is somebody clearly that you want to maintain a relationship for. So move from the frustration, the getting your buttons pushed, the this or that, the other. Move from that, away from that. Remind yourself you love this person. You want this person to make good choices. You want this person to respect other people's perspectives and opinions and requests. And therefore, you will model what it looks like when somebody does not respect your request. You cannot get mad at other people when they do not change their behavior, because other people are not going to change their behavior. If we're talking about a boundary with somebody, that means this has happened more than once. Otherwise, you don't need a boundary. It was a one-off. 2 or more times, somebody is doing something that you find non-negotiable, inappropriate, out of line for you. And you don't need them to co-sign how you feel about it, because they're not responsible for your feelings. They don't cause your feelings, and they don't have to validate your feelings. You get to decide what is and is not acceptable or appropriate for you. That's it. Nobody else gets to tell you whether that's right or wrong, because who discerns what's right or wrong? So if something bothers you, it bothers you. You don't have to have somebody agree with you, especially the person who's transgressing the boundary. If they agreed with you, they wouldn't be doing it, right? So they're not going to agree with you. They're probably potentially going to get a little frustrated, maybe a little mad, maybe a little resentful, because often humans don't like to be told what to do, especially if we feel like we've hurt somebody's feelings, or somebody we love is now upset with us. And a lot of times people kind of, project that back on you by being upset when you tell them not to do something. Just think about how children behave when you say no to them. They throw tantrums. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean they don't love you, but that's sort of the human response. You want what you want. So that's what we're talking about when we are talking about boundaries. Come from a place of love. Remind yourself why you love them, because you do. And remember that it's important to teach people, to model for people how we want to be treated, not how we expect them to behave or change their actions. It's what we expect for us, and be very clear, and don't expect people to read your minds, and throw away what we called the manual. Throw it out, because they're not going to do what you want anyway. But you can model what is and is not acceptable to you. And it's always fun to have that conversation about, well, where did you get the idea that this is okay? You know, who taught you that, or who told you, who did you grow up watching do this? What's that about? That's always, you hear some really interesting stories, and you get to know people even better when you hear why it is that they do what they do. Well, my mom's best friend would just come over anytime, and it made me feel like we were in really good community, and we felt really loved by everybody. And I just, I thought maybe that would be the same for your children if I just stopped by and they felt like they had a lot of support. You hear the story, and all of a sudden you can find yourself interested, engaged, living in a place of empathy, and reminding yourself just how much you love this person. Sometimes there is no story and they just think it's okay. I don't know. That's fine too. It's just not okay for me. So let's have a conversation about that. And you don't have to be afraid of the conversations. And if you understand that often when you tell a human no, their first response is potentially getting upset about that, because no human likes to be told no. That goes back to that survival mechanism of needing validation and needing acceptance from our hunting and gathering community. We don't want to be disapproved of and kicked out. People's knee-jerk responses to correction, and not correction from the perspective of them having to change, correction from the perspective that you are not going to tolerate something because you won't tolerate it. They can go do that somewhere else. You're not telling them to stop doing it. They just can't do it if they want to be around you. So the other part that's so important is follow through. You really have to follow through with this stuff. Otherwise, you train people that you're not serious and that there will be no consequence. And then they do worse stuff because they can get away with it, and they can watch you react to them pushing your buttons, especially again, look at kids. Kids love it. Any attention is good attention. Any ability to get high levels of energy and emotion out of another human is something kids love. Even if it's negative, it's still, watch me make them turn tomato red. Watch me make them turn purple and start getting really loud. And I don't necessarily like the loud, but at the same time, it's so powerful that I can just do that. It's a power trip. Don't let people manipulate you in that way. They're not responsible for your feelings. Only you are. So you have to learn that. All right. All right. I've got a PDF in the show notes, and y'all have a great week. Talk to you soon.